Are you insane? Ziza grabbed Vario by the shoulders. That was a human!
I know, said Vario. That was a bad idea. I totally regret it.
He could have killed you! Ziza shook Vario, face twisted in fear and anger.
Blades, she was beautiful.
What were you thinking?
The human in question casually finished wiping blood off the tip of his blade with a black handkerchief. He looked to be 16, the same age as Vario. He was tall and lean, with long dark hair. He wore black pants, a white tank top, and a long leather jacket. Satisfied that his blade was clean, the human sheathed his sword and walked away.
It was a no-stakes duel,
Vario protested. He had no reason to kill me.
He's a human, Vario.
Ziza's grip tightened on his shoulder.
They're made to kill. He doesn't need a reason.
Ziza was Vario's best and only friend. They'd known each other since they were littles. She was a prolia, like Vario. Her skin was a perfect yellow, her hair was the color of sunset, and her eyes were emerald green. She was of average height, which made her taller than Vario. Ziza wore black leggings under a purple skirt and a top that bared her midriff. The clothes were the latest fashion, and her dueling sword was of decent make, a signal that she was of the upper middle class.
It's all right, Ziza.
Vario tried to placate the woman.
It's all right. He didn't hurt me, look.
He held up his wrist.
It's just a scratch.
Vario was not of the upper middle class. He was an orphan. His shirt and pants were cheap and basic, as was the sword on his hip. Vario was short and scrawny with green hair and blue eyes. His attire screamed his low status, and the other prolia easily guessed he was too poor to afford an engram. Engrams were an essential part of life on Prolia Prime. They were programs that could be uploaded directly into a person's brain. The engrams were the sole source of education and skills among the Vario's people. While all knowledge programs were engrams, only one of them was referred to as the engram, the dueling program, the one that taught swordplay. Ziza seized Vario's wrist and eyed it critically.
I guess it is just a scratch,
she admitted.
I don't think it'll leave a scar.
She let his hand drop. She still looked worried.
That's good. You've got too many scars already.
I'll be all right, Ziza, Vario promised. His gaze drifted to the human walking away. Blades, what a fighter. The man walked with a confident swagger. There was an odd grace to the way he moved.
No, you won't,
Ziza told him.
You can't keep picking fights like this. You're going to get yourself killed.
Most duels were decided by first blood, but that did not make them safe. The first blow that draws blood could, and often was a sword through the heart. Prolians were an advanced race with excellent medical technology, but only a quarter of them lived to a ripe old age. Duels were the reason why.
I don't have a choice,
Vario told her. He pointed at his face, crisscrossed with scar tissue.
I didn't choose these duels, Ziza. I have to fight. If I don't...
Whetstone!
A voice boomed. Dread shot up Vario's legs. He looked over his shoulder to find Drugo grinning at him. Drugo was tall, well over 2 meters. He wore the finest clothing, and his sword was more than Vario would make in a lifetime. He was followed by half a dozen well-dressed sycophants. Drugo was the source of most of Vario's scars.
Did I see that right? Were you just in a dueling circle with a human?
Yes. Vario answered Drugo's question.
I thought it was you.
Drugo grinned wider.
Be careful, Whetstone. I'm a jealous man. If I catch you dueling other people, I might start to think I'm not good enough.
You know me.
Vario shrugged.
I'm a glutton for punishment.
More like you've got a death wish.
Drugo laughed.
A human, really?
Drugo sneered down at Vario.
If you really want to die, all you have to do is ask.
Leave him alone, Drugo, Ziza warned.
Or what?
Drugo's eyes glittered with menace.
You going to challenge me, Ziza? You want to end up looking like him?
He pointed at Vario's face. Ziza glared. Drugo placed a hand on his sword. Ziza looked away.
I thought so.
Drugo turned back to Vario. His eyes flicked to Vario's wrist.
Looks like the human let you off easy, Whetstone. Guess he decided you're not worth his time. How long did you last? 10 seconds? 5?
3. Vario admitted.
3 seconds?
Drugo snorted.
That's embarrassing even for you.
He tapped the hilt of his blade, thinking.
I'm disappointed in you, Vario. I thought you knew your place, but if you're fighting humans...
He shook his head slowly.
I think you need another lesson.
Drugo, don't! Ziza pleaded. You already cut him today, and you took his daily allotment.
I did, didn't I?
Drugo smiled.
I guess I'll have to take something different then.
The taller Prolian drew his sword.
I challenge you, Vario. If I win, I'll take your shoes.
He laughed again. The next day, Vario went looking for the human again. He found him in the food court. Food courts were scattered throughout the commercial districts of the city. Each of them consisted of a wide, flat area filled with tables and chairs. Surrounding the common area were various restaurants. The smells made Vario's mouth water. He hadn't eaten in 3 days. As an orphan, Vario was provided a daily allotment by the state. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a pair of meals. The problem was that Drugo and others like him loved to challenge helpless Vacos like Vario. They didn't need to take his money, but they always did. The strong liked hurting the weak, and the rich loved taking from the poor. Vario marched up to the human. The man was talking to a girl, laughing as he ate. Vario waited until there was a pause in the conversation, then said, Sir Human, I challenge you. The tall human turned and gave him an annoyed look. Do you mind? I'm having lunch with my girlfriend. Oh, Vario flushed. Sorry. I can wait till you're done. The human scowled at him for a moment, then went back to eating. Vario stood in awkward silence. After a minute, the man gave Vario a considering look.
Hey, aren't you the guy I beat yesterday?
Yes. Vario nodded.
And you're challenging me again?
The man raised an eyebrow.
Do you have a death wish or something?
I need to get stronger, Vario explained. The human froze. He put down his food and gave Vario his full attention.
What did you say?
I need to get stronger, Vario repeated.
Is that why you're challenging me?
There was an intensity in the human's gaze.
You think a strong opponent will make you better?
I hope so, Vario admitted.
So you're just wandering around challenging anyone that looks tough?
The human rubbed his chin.
Hoping to... what? Learn?
Yes, Vario confirmed.
Huh. I've never seen one of you do that before.
The man stood. He held out a hand to Vario.
I'm Raphael.
Vario grasped Raphael's hand, completing the human ritual greeting. My name is Vario. It's nice to meet you. The human gestured at the woman who'd been sitting next to him.
This is my girlfriend, Vyra.
She gave him a wave. Her mouth was full. It's nice to meet you. Vario waved back.
Well, don't just stand there, Vario,
said the human.
Have a...
Vario, no! A shout interrupted him. He turned to see a figure running towards them. Ziza. She narrowly avoided colliding with an elderly couple, swerving and skidding through the crowd. She reached them in moments, out of breath and panicked. Don't challenge the human! It's too late, Raphael told her. He gave an annoyed glance at his meal. The challenge has already been issued.
What?
Ziza went pale.
No.
Don't worry, the human told her. I won't kill him.
Please, he's just...
Ziza trailed off, then turned back to Raphael.
Wait, what?
I won't kill Vario, the human reassured her. I promise, I'll nick him a little. I have to. But he'll be okay.
Ziza
stared at the man.
Oh, thank you.
Don't mention it. Raphael gave her a smile. Why don't you two sit down? Join us for lunch. Vario hesitated. He'd lost all his money to a rich kid 2 hours ago. Raphael noticed the look. His eyes flicked down to the orphan's cheap sword. My treat, he offered. He clapped Vario on the shoulder. If you're going to get yourself killed, it's better to do it on a full stomach. Am I right? Didn't the human just promise not to kill him?
I guess so.
Good. Raphael gestured at the table. Sit down in order. He smiled at Ziza. I'm Raphael, by the way.
Ziza.
The girl tried to smile back. And this is my Vira. The human gestured at his girlfriend.
You'd better not be looking at my boyfriend.
The other woman warned. Her hand drifted to her sword.
I'm not,
Ziza assured her. There's no need for that, Vira, the human told her. Can't you see she's with Vario? Ziza hesitated. Vira glared with suspicion. Ziza looked at Vario. He stared back, trying not to blush. Ziza wasn't with Vario. Not romantically, no matter how much he wished she was.
Yes?
Yes. Vario flushed. Why would... Ziza wasn't... A glance at Vira gave him the answer. The other woman was ready to fight. Ziza had an engram, but she didn't like to duel. Pretending to be Vario's girlfriend was an easy way to avoid a fight. Vario knew he should play along. His tongue betrayed him.
Ziza's, she's...
Ziza burst into a giggling fit. She gave Vario a mischievous grin and wrapped an arm around his waist.
Yes?
She said firmly. I'm Vario's girlfriend. Raphael smiled and rolled his eyes. There, see, Vira? Now sit down, you two. My lunch is getting cold. 20 minutes and a hearty meal later, Vario followed Raphael to a dueling circle. The dueling circles were placed at regular intervals throughout Priola Prime. 10 meters across, a red patch of ground contained by a metal circle. Once the two fighters stepped into the circle, the metal shimmered. A cylinder of transparent blue light appeared around them. The light was harmless, but letting any part of Vario's body cross it would count as a loss. What are the stakes? Raphael asked.
No stakes,
Vario told him.
I just want to fight you.
Works for me. The human drew his sword. It was different than Vario's. The length was a few centimeters shorter, and it was a hair thinner. It was also of superior quality to Vario's bargain bin Wista, but that was to be expected. Stakes confirmed. A voice spoke. The voice belonged to the functionary. The functionary was an artificial intelligence tasked with overseeing duels. Every city had one. The functionary would record the stakes, monitor the duels, and choose the winners. It was also responsible for enforcing the code duello. Anyone who attempted to cheat, interfere with, or refuse to honor the terms of the duel would be dealt with swiftly and harshly. The functionary spoke again. Draw blades and assume the ready position. Vario drew his sword and pointed it at the human. The functionary said, Begin. Raphael kept his sword pointed, but he didn't move. He was frowning. Vario, I think you've got a faulty engram. You're holding your sword all wrong.
I can't afford a dueling engram,
Vario replied. You don't have an engram? The human's eyebrows rose. And you're still trying to fight? Vario shrugged.
I have to get stronger.
You said that already. The human smiled. All right, Vario. Show me what you've learned so far. Vario charged. He went for a slash at Raphael's chest. He swung as hard and fast as he could. Raphael didn't bother to parry. His feet shifted and he swayed out of the way. Vario tried again and again. The human dodged without effort. Vario changed tactics. He stabbed. The human dodged the first few, but Vario moved closer, thrusting over and over with his cheap knockoff sword. Raphael circled him, parrying. He still didn't look like he was trying. Vario attacked for nearly half a minute. His chest was heaving, his arms felt like lead. He started taking longer and longer pauses between attacks. He kept at it for most of another minute, but his vision was starting to swim. He couldn't get enough air. He couldn't keep his sword up. Raphael casually reached out with his blade. He made a tiny incision on Vario's upper arm. There was a ringing noise. The functionary said, "The duel is complete. The winner is Raphael Kalin." The ring of blue light enclosing the dueling circle winked out. Raphael wiped the tip of his sword off, then sheathed it. Vario was still on his knees trying to get his breath back. Raphael came closer. "Bad news, Vario. You're the worst fencer I've ever seen." The words were crushing, but Vario didn't have the breath to respond. He nodded. "The good news is, you don't have to stay that way." The human turned and walked away. "I'll see you tomorrow." Raphael was still panting when Ziza reached him. "Vario!" She checked the wound on his arm. It was barely a scratch, an inch long and just barely deep enough to bleed. Vario couldn't imagine the level of skill needed to make such a wound on purpose. "You're all right." She frowned in the direction the human had left. "What was that about?"
I think,
Vario panted.
I made a friend."
He climbed to his feet. His muscles were wobbly. He had trouble putting his sword away. Only when it was safely sheathed did he notice the crowd around him. So many people. They'd come to watch the human fight. Some looked at Vario with pity, some with disgust, none with approval. Vario hunched his shoulders. He moved to leave with Ziza at his side. A voice stopped him.
"Whetstone!"
The voice carried over the crowd. It froze Vario in his tracks. Drugo pushed through the crowd, his followers in tow.
"Whetstone!"
Vario placed a hand on the hilt of his sword. It wouldn't help, but the feel of it was comforting. The rest of the crowd parted when they realized who was pushing through them. Drugo sauntered the rest of the way, unhindered, his face twisted in an ugly sneer.
"I'm disappointed in you, Whetstone."
The taller man glared down at Vario.
"I told you yesterday I'm a jealous man. I told you to know your place, and here you are, embarrassing your entire species."
Drugo tisked.
"Do you have anything to say for yourself?"
Vario's hand tightened on his hilt. He said nothing.
"Disappointing."
Drugo chided.
"I guess I shouldn't have expected better from a Vako like you. Tell me, do you still have today's allotment?"
Vario shook his head.
"That's too bad," said Drugo. "You're running out of things for me to take. Maybe your shirt next? Your pants?"
Drugo chuckled.
"No, I can't take the clothes off an orphan's back."
He shook his head.
"I think our little game's coming to an end, Whetstone. I think your sword's been sharpened enough. I think it's time I put you where you really belong."
He stepped closer, looming over Vario with death in his eyes.
"In the ground."
"Vario's life is mine to take." The voice was Raphael's. The crowd parted again as the human approached. Drugo stepped back, turning to face the human. His eyes raged, but his voice was polite.
"This is no concern of yours, Sir Human. It's a personal matter between me and Vario."
"He's mine," Raphael repeated.
"You can't fight his duels for him,"
Drugo informed the man.
"Vario must live and die by his own steel. Such is our way.
I never said you can't fight him. Raphael shifted his coat back, revealing the hilt of his slender sword. I said he's mine to kill. If you take his head, I'll replace it with yours.
The look in his eyes nearly made Vario step back. Raphael had been so nice, Vario had almost forgotten what he was. A human. A killer of all. One of the deadliest things in the galaxy. Drugo snarled.
The whetstone is mine. I've been playing with him for years.
You're claiming him too?
The human smiled.
Maybe we should settle this in a duel.
It was a smile so cold it could freeze the stars themselves.
To death, of course.
Drugo's eyes widened, then narrowed.
You don't know what you're doing, Sir Human. Do you know who I am? Who my father is?
Is your father going to fight your duels for you?
Raphael asked mildly. Drugo glared at the man, but he wasn't stupid.
Fine.
He spat at Vario's feet.
The Vaco's not worth it, for now.
Drugo turned and stalked off. His entourage followed. One looked angry, but the rest had fear in their eyes. Raphael watched them go. When they were out of sight, he turned to Vario.
Forgive my interference,
he said with a slight bow.
I can't abide useless people.
It's, Vario swallowed. Being rescued by another was shameful. Word would spread about Vario. On the other hand, he was alive, and the few that bothered to speak of him already called him a Vaco.
It's fine. I can always track him down later.
Raphael laughed.
I guess you can.
He frowned.
I was going to find you here tomorrow, but I think that's not a good idea anymore. You got a console?
No. Personal consoles weren't that expensive, but they were out of Vario's price range. In addition to his daily allotment, the state gave Vario a small monthly stipend for sundries. Very small. Buying new shoes would use most of it. Vario had already resigned himself to spending the next few weeks barefoot. Vario had tried, was still trying, to find work. There weren't many people willing to hire an orphan. There were none that would hire a Vaco who couldn't fight. A duel was a standard part of the hiring process, and Vario's performance had been so abysmal that a few employers had threatened to kill him if he ever showed his face again. Raphael nodded. He pulled a console out of his pocket. He typed into it. After a few seconds, the device beeped. A card ejected out the side of it. Raphael gave the card to Vario.
Here, it's got directions to my place. Come see me tomorrow, around 9-ish, okay?
Vario took the card. He nodded numbly. The next day, Vario followed the directions Raphael's card provided. Raphael's house was in a nice section of town. A very nice section. The people there were not happy to see a shoeless orphan. Vario thought he'd be challenged and killed, but people shrugged and turned away when they got close enough to see Raphael's card. The symbol on the back was the symbol of Terra, and no one wanted to risk a human's wrath. Raphael's house was a mansion. The human was waiting outside. The moment Vario walked up, Raphael said,
I challenge you to a duel. If I win, you will listen to me and do as I say for the next 3 hours.
Vario blinked, then shrugged.
If I win, you'll buy me lunch again.
Raphael smiled.
I'll probably do that anyway.
The duel was quick. Raphael didn't play with Vario this time. He just nicked his hand the moment the match started. The human cleaned and sheathed his sword, then said,
Come on.
Vario followed the man into his mansion. Raphael took him to a massive room in the basement. The floors were some kind of shiny stone. Half of the basement was full of equipment he didn't recognize. He would learn later they were for exercise. The other half contained a dueling circle and a variety of swords and armor.
First things first,
said the human.
What's your shoe size?
What? Vario blinked.
I'm not having you barefoot on my piste,
Raphael told him. It's uncivilized. He pulled out his console. What's your shoe size? Vario told him. Raphael typed it into his console. All right, we've got 20 minutes before they show up. I can see you've got questions. Go ahead and ask.
What's this about?
Vario asked.
Why did you bring me here, and what's a piste?
A piste is what we call the dueling ground on Earth, Raphael told him. I brought you here to teach you to fence. You're going to be my new sparring partner.
Sparring?
We're going to duel, Raphael explained. Not for stakes, just for training.
Training?
Vario was still confused. Raphael grimaced. A planet full of fencers and not one of you knows what training is? He crossed his arms. Tell me, have you ever played music? Sing a song, maybe?
I can't afford the engrams,
Vario admitted. Engrams. The human shook his head. All right, let me ask you something. How do you think your people learned to do things before you had engrams?
Before?
Vario scratched his head.
I thought we always had engrams.
Engrams are advanced technology, Raphael told him. Someone had to invent it.
Oh.
Your education system sucks. Raphael huffed out a breath. All right, here's the deal. Humans are the best swordsmen, right?
Yes.
The reason for that is we don't use engrams. Raphael smiled at Vario's shocked expression. That's right. We learn how to do things through training and repetition. Vario was still confused. Raphael continued. I'm going to show and explain the art of fencing to you. Then we'll have you practice by doing what I showed you over and over again. Vario stared at the man. He was still confused, but it sounded like,
You mean you're going to teach me to fight? Fencing is your word for swordplay.
Exactly. Raphael moved his leather jacket and hung it up. He was still in loose-fitting pants and a tank top, but the tank top was red this time. Most humans don't know how to fence, you know? Vario was too busy being shocked again to reply. The human continued. It's one of our oldest art forms, but most of us don't need to learn. Our cultures are a lot different than yours. We don't resolve our differences with duels.
You don't?
Vario couldn't imagine such a thing. It must be pure chaos.
Then how?
Doesn't matter. Raphael waved away the question. The point is, humans aren't allowed to come to your planet unless we learn how to fence. It's the only way to deal with your crazy culture. My mom moved us here for work. She doesn't like to fence, but I've developed a taste for it. He grimaced. The problem is, there isn't anyone worth fencing against.
My people aren't good enough.
Vario nodded knowingly. Your people rely too much on technology. Raphael corrected. You must use medtech instead of exercise. You use engrams instead of learning for yourselves. All Prolian duelists fight the same way. You're slow, predictable, and you've got no stamina. The human made a fist. I need a challenge, Vario. A rival that can push me to be better. I think you're my best bet.
Me?
Vario couldn't believe what he was hearing.
You said I'm the worst fighter you've ever seen.
Yeah, the human agreed. I also said you've got potential. More importantly, you're the only Prolian I've found that's actively trying to learn. He crossed his arms. It'll take a long time, Vario. Months, at least. Probably years. But if you stick with it, I'll make you better than any Prolian. As good as any human. Maybe even as good as me. Vario needed to sit down. His heart was pounding in his ears.
You really think you can do that?
I intend to try. Raphael draped an arm across Vario's shoulder. Whether it works or not will depend on you. What do you say, Vario? Want to learn how to fence? A storm of emotions welled up in the Prolian. He grinned so hard he worried it would split his face.
Are you sure I don't have to sell you my soul or something?
Raphael laughed. When the shoes arrived, Vario almost refused to wear them. They were human-made nanotechnology. He couldn't even guess how much they must cost. Raphael reminded him of the terms of the duel. Vario had to do whatever the human said for 2.5 more hours. Grumbling, Vario took the shoes. They formed perfectly to his feet. He'd never felt anything so comfortable and fine. When they finished adjusting, they changed their shape. Now they looked ordinary, cheap even. Okay. The human clapped his hands together. Now we can get started. Vario nodded, reaching for his sword. Raphael stopped him. No. We're starting with the very basics. You won't use a real blade yet. He pulled a sword off the wall. It was similar to the human sword. Instead of a point, there was a little ball on the end of it. This is an épée, a practice version. It's not much different from your Wista. The human tossed the épée to Vario. Vario raised it to point at Raphael. He laughed. Eager, are we? Bad news, Vario. We're not going to be sparring for a while. The next few days are just the very basics. Stance, footwork, and how to hold a sword. It took Raphael nearly an hour to get him into a proper fencing stance, 1 foot forward, feet shoulder-width apart. Vario was to keep his knees slightly bent and his shoulders relaxed. There were 2 ways to hold an épée. Raphael had Vario use the variant known as the pistol grip. When the human was finally satisfied with Vario's stance, they moved on to footwork. Advance, retreat, pass, lunge. Raphael was very particular about how Vario performed each motion. He expected each step to be crisp and clean. Vario was not to drag his feet or shuffle, or be out of balance for even a moment. By the time the 3 hours ended, Vario's legs were screaming, his arms were screaming. His lower back wasn't screaming yet, but it would be soon. Raphael brought Vario lunch. They parted ways, and Vario promised to return in the morning. The next 2 weeks were torture. Vario's body hurt in ways he'd never imagined, but each day he found he could train a little longer. Each day he watched himself improve. The human was attentive and patient. He corrected Vario over and over, but he never talked down or insulted the Prolian. He seemed as happy as Vario when he noticed an improvement. Raphael insisted on going out to lunch each day, and dinner if the training stretched long enough. No one bothered Vario while the human was near. At first, he thought it was because of his shame, but soon he realized he just wasn't worth noticing. No one noticed compared to Raphael. All eyes were on the human. He was challenged 4 or 5 times a day. The human treated the more polite challengers the way he treated Vario, a quick defeat without significant injury. The ones who were rude found a hole in their vitals. Raphael didn't kill any of them outright, but they'd think twice before challenging the human a second time. The weeks passed into months. Vario learned parries and thrusts, riposte and disengage, the counterattack. He practiced his stance, his footwork, even his breathing. When Vario's body finally stopped hurting, Raphael gave him exercises to hurt it more. Cardio, weightlifting, stretches, especially the stretches. Raphael made Vario stretch before and after every session, and several other times throughout the day. Why are we doing all this? Vario asked one day. The exercise, the stretching? Cardio for stamina, the human explained. Weightlifting for strength, stretching for flexibility. He grinned. It makes us look good, too. He flexed. I would like to look good, Vario admitted. Hoping Ziza will finally notice you? Raphael grinned. You should ask her out, you know? She feels the same way. How would you know? Vario teased. You've got a new girlfriend every week. Yeah? The human cocked an eyebrow. A new girlfriend every week. That means I know when a girl likes someone. It also means you get dumped a lot, Vario pointed out. The human shrugged. Nobody's perfect. Eventually, Ziza joined their training sessions. She went through the same painful process Vario had, but faster. Vario wasn't sure if he should be jealous or proud. Raphael's parade of girlfriends meant she was getting challenged every few weeks, but she beat them easily. Raphael had sparred frequently against Vario and Ziza, but he didn't let them spar each other until Ziza had been training for months.
Vario was delighted to find their skill was mostly even. It was the first time he'd ever been close to her match. When she laughingly pointed out that he'd been training much longer than her, Vario countered by saying she was the most amazing person in the world. She'd kissed him after that. Raphael had rolled his eyes. 2 years after their training began, Raphael moved away. His mother had completed her work. Vario and Ziza would miss him terribly. The day after he left, Drugo found them in the food court.
Well, if it isn't my old whetstone,
the taller man sneered. He looked around dramatically.
And what's this? No human to keep you safe?
Vario eyed the man with disdain. He was not the weak boy he'd been 2 years ago.
Let's save some time, Drugo. I challenge you and all your friends. I will duel you one after the other. If I win, you will give me your sword, and none of you will ever bother me, Ziza, or anyone I care about ever again.
He glared at the Vako.
And that includes using proxies like your daddy.
Drugo's eyes widened, then he laughed.
You've grown some balls, Whetstone. I'm glad you won't die a coward. If we win, Ziza has to do whatever we want for the rest of the day.
His grin was vicious.
And I do mean whatever.
You can't. Vario started. We accept, Ziza said firmly. Kick their asses, Vario. The first of Drugo's sycophants started with a slash at Vario's face. It was pathetic. With a start, Vario realized he hadn't fenced anyone but Raphael and Ziza since the day he'd met the human. Back then, an attack like that would have finished him. Now it was nothing. Vario used a parry katra. The riposte sliced open his opponent's forehead. The second man tried the same thing and got the same result. Vario frowned. What kind of idiot would use the same attack after watching it fail? The answer came to him when the third opponent fell. It was because they were using the engram. They all fought the same way. They hadn't learned to improvise or think critically. Vario might as well be fencing against children. The sixth man fell. This one had made a lewd comment about Ziza. For that, Vario took 2 of his fingers. As the others dragged the howling fool out of the circle, Drugo stepped in.
You finally got an engram, didn't you?
Drugo looked angry, but not nervous.
Not just any engram either. You have the new one the humans just made. A last gift from Raphael, I bet.
He raised his sword.
Bad news, Vako. I've got it too.
Drugo lunged. It was fast, smooth. Vario parried. Drugo dodged his riposte. Back and forth they fought, wistas flashing and ringing. Vario was faster, but Drugo's reach was enormous. He towered over Vario. Vario compensated by attacking his enemy's wrists and arms. But the new engram was wise to that trick. Vario wasn't sure he could win. Then he remembered what the human had told him. Prolians relied too much on technology. The human-built engram was enough to match Vario's skill, but it did nothing for Drugo's body. Drugo had not honed his body the way Vario had. Vario attacked. He lunged and passed and parried. He breathed with each movement, pushing his body as fast as it would go. Drugo kept up at first. His blade almost reached Vario more than once. Vario didn't stop. For nearly a minute their swords rang. Drugo's breath came in ragged gasps. He started to slow. Vario pressed. Feint, then cut over, pass, lunge, parry, riposte. Drugo's defense was desperate. His footwork faltered. He got sloppy. He stepped too far forward on his next lunge. His overreach cost him his balance. Vario capitalized on the mistake before he even registered it had happened. His wista struck true. There was a ringing noise. The functionary spoke. The duel is complete. The winner is Vario Frood. Drugo fell to his knees. He pressed a hand to the hole in his chest.
How?
Vario pointed his sword at the sycophants.
You, get Drugo to medical.
They hesitated.
Now!
The sycophants moved.
Don't forget to toss me his sword first.
The victor reminded them. A wall of noise slammed into Vario. Cheers, a crowd had formed. They were cheering for him. Vario smiled. If only Raphael was here to see. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped down his blade. Don't step out of the circle just yet. A voice called. Ziza. She stepped into the dueling circle. She had a sword in her hand. It's my turn now.
It's what?
Vario frowned.
Now? I just dueled 7 people, Ziza. I'm a little winded.
Too bad. Ziza raised her sword. I challenge you to a duel, Vario Frood. If I win, you have to marry me. Vario dropped his wista in shock.
I have to... You mean...
I'm serious, Vario. Ziza glared. Pick up your sword. Married? Vario fumbled for his sword. He was breathing too hard. His blood pounded in his ears. Ziza wanted to marry him. He swallowed. Ziza wanted to marry him. Vario started to laugh. If you're laughing at me, Ziza warned.
No!
Vario held out a placating hand.
No, I'm not. Honest, it's just...
He laughed harder.
I dreamed of beating Drugo for most of my life.
The fencer told her.
It should have been my greatest moment. But now...
Vario picked up Drugo's sword. He tossed it carelessly out of the dueling circle.
After you? I'm not sure I'll even remember it.
He forced his laughter down and took his stance.
I accept your challenge, Ziza. Same stakes.
He gave her his fiercest expression and stole a line from Raphael.
Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary.